Hello, Chandler.
How's it going?
I'm really good. How are you?
Awesome. Pretty good. A little rainy here. They canceled school today, which is always nice. But Georgia's in the national championship tonight, so we gotta bring one home.
Can't wait to watch that. Yeah, I'll be rooting for your team tonight, actually.
That's good. Good. Glad we're on the same side.
So I imagine you're ready to get started.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead.
So I'll go ahead and start with the problem.
Okay.
Because I think that that's what's misunderstood about the issue. And I imagine that, or at least the counter arguments I know talk around this. So the biggest problem with Trump moving the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, or the enacting of the 95 Amendment, is that it was meant to harm the possible success of the Oslo peace accords to begin with, and now it would reward Israel for continuing to conquer the territory after illegally occupying it for 50 years. And the burden to win the round is to prove that there's a benefit to this decision. And I'm going to go ahead and my burden is to prove that there's a negative. So I'm going to go ahead and throw out what my negatives are. So, of course, the big negative is that the peace agreement was never reached. But specifically, it's bad for the U.S., which is because, as you may know, every president they can postpone it for 6 months, and they've done that continuously since 1995 because they felt that it threatened security. But additionally, it's bad for both Israel and the United States because we lose a vote because people will vote against us in the Security Council of the UN, and specifically the Arab League, who does actually recognize Israel and want to make peace with Israel, says that it will not trade with the U.S. or Israel. And right now, the BDS campaign is very successful. So that's actually a problem, and it could be a problem for the United States as well. For the Palestinians, it's the loss of property because Jerusalem is an occupied zone. I'll get to the legality in a second. And then you have to consider not just the Palestinians, but the Arab world in general, which goes back to the Arab League.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to start. I'm not an expert on this. This is a little bit out of my,
Okay.
the normal field that I study. I'm much
Okay,
more.
Chandler, I wasn't finished, but
No, go ahead. Yeah.
That's fine.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Go ahead.
So I'm going to go with my definition of Jerusalem. It's a holy city to the three major religions, and it's been traditionally split between three quarters between them. I think I'm going to go ahead and go to the legality before the geography.
Okay.
So Benjamin Netanyahu said when Trump enacted this that Jerusalem has always been Israel's capital, when that's only true in the Old Testament. The reality is that when the UN created Israel in 1947, it designated Jerusalem as an international city. In spite of this, Israel conquered the western half in 1948 and the eastern half in 1967 before annexing the western portion and moving its capital there in 1980. The UN considers all these actions to be null and void, and that's under the Fourth Geneva Convention, which was created because of the Holocaust. It says that you cannot move one population into another, into an area that's a war zone. So geographically, this thing is split right now between the Arabs and the eastern half, the city of Al-Quds, and the western half, which was Jewish anyway, which already has been annexed. So the controversies over the eastern half, and I can't fail to mention that the eastern half is completely surrounded by settlements into the West Bank, which is also illegally occupied. So I'll go ahead and sorry to be a little long-winded there, but so I'll go ahead and let you start, Chandler, and thanks for being patient.
Yeah, no problem. Like I said, this isn't my field of expertise. I'm much more of a economics guy than say a history guy. But I think it's interesting, and so I'm definitely in this to learn as well as give my thoughts on it. So to start, I have to say, especially, Trump, I think got some very unfair criticism for his decision. And I think people are overlooking what like the role of a president is, right? Like the president's role is to enforce the laws and bills passed by Congress, correct? And so when you have a law that's passed in 1995 saying that we recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and we're going to move the embassy to Jerusalem, and it's passed 93-5 in the Senate and 374-37 in the House, basically fairly firm vote there that this is what the American people want. And then once again in June of 2017, the Senate passed a resolution unanimously, 90-0, saying that the legislative body recognizes the 50 years since Israel captured the eastern part of the city in 1967. It shows that definitely the U.S. at least wanted this to happen to some extent. And so I feel like it is the role of the president to enforce that. I don't think it is a fault of the president to want to, enforce and move the embassy to Jerusalem when that has been passed by Congress. I feel like that's his job, especially when every president before that, as a campaign promise, Bush, Clinton, Obama, they all said that they were going to do this action. So I don't think it's fair to fault Trump with this. Now to get on to some of the different points that you brought up. So first you talk about the harm of peace in Jerusalem. Now, I think it's important to note that violence predates any of the conflicts and talks that we're seeing now. Even before Jerusalem was under the control of the Jewish people back in like 1929, when it was under British occupation, there was still riots against the Jewish people by the Muslims for bringing something like chairs to the Wailing Wall, which dozens of Jewish people were killed. And so I think one of the questions I'd ask you is, why do you think that moving the capital or the embassy, to Jerusalem increases the problem as far as a violent standpoint compared to how it has been? Because already violence in the city of Jerusalem is, incomparable, especially against the Jewish population more than any other. So why do you think this, directly increases the issue?
Because of the holy sites that are there, specifically the Temple Mount or the Dome of the Rock. That's what a lot of the controversy is over. It's the old city, which is kind of in the middle. So even though this is actually an archaeological and theological debate, because they don't actually know that it was there. So the Jewish population believes that the Temple Mount, where the Western Wall is, that they want to build a temple there, because that's where Solomon's temple was in the Old Testament, even though it's actually contested by archaeologists and theologians. That's another debate. But the problem being that the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or the Dome of the Rock, which is the third holiest site to Muslims, happens to be there, and then that's what the controversy is over. That's why, and also you have to consider the validity of the UN, because we have to uphold the Fourth Geneva Convention, and if you want to throw this is an ugly holy war. So I think it's really one-sided to talk one way about it. The thing is that we have to uphold the Fourth Geneva Convention, which was created because of the Holocaust.
Yeah, I agree. So I do. I understand what you talk about the Dome of the Rock. Now, a few things I want to bring up about the Dome of the Rock and the Temple Mount. For one, the Dome of the Rock, the Temple Mount specifically, which the Dome of the Rock is on top of the Temple Mount, is the single most important site in Jewish history, right?
So they don't know that it was there, though.
Well, but the idea of it, right? It's just like the Dome of the Rock, right? It's
that wall could be from a fortress that was there.
I mean, it's
just
true,
like Jesus said, the whole city was destroyed.
But to them, they idolize that as like the city or of the religious site, correct? So to them, that's important, right? Because they feel like they're given by God the land, and that is the holy site of the land that they find the most important. And so when it comes to that, I think we should start by saying that Jews can't even visit the Dome of the Rock. If you get inside, they actually discriminate. There's a bunch of articles and evidence on it that Muslims discriminate on Jews that try and enter the Dome of the Rock. If you even are able to sneak your way inside, because I don't look Jewish, but let's say I was Jewish and I got inside and I was caught praying, you're getting arrested at best. You might get taken out back and beaten, or possibly worse. There's a huge problem in eastern Jerusalem of Jewish people being significantly more discriminated against than, say, a Muslim would be in Western Jerusalem. If you look at actual statistics from the Israeli government about like the actual domestic crimes that occur in each half of the city, the statistics against Jewish citizens in the eastern half is far more significant than Muslims in the western half of the city. So I think it's important to say, if we're going to go into the Jews illegally occupying this land, it's not always, them provoking this violence, right? Because even when the Jews didn't have control of the city, I believe it was in 1964 when the Muslims were still in control of the city, there was still several riots that caused, I think it was over 100.
They're not supposed to be in the eastern city. They're not supposed to be in the eastern city. It's being occupied. It's illegal that they're there at all. The reason that those people are upset at them is because they stole their private property.
Well, the eastern city, as far as I know, it's still open to like visitors. If I'm not mistaken, you can still visit the eastern city. You just can't live there. If I'm not mistaken, is that correct?
Sure, you can visit.
Yeah. But even while they're visiting there, they still get discriminated against and have, mass acts of violence committed against them. And there are people that you don't see represented in the western half. So
what do you think the IDF does to the Palestinians there?
The IDF?
Yeah, 150,000 Palestinians have been evicted and had their property stolen in the city of Al-Quds. That's what this controversy is over. It's not over the western half; it's over the eastern.
Well, I was responding to the Dome of the Rock claim that
they live there for a year. They came. Well, I don't really have a problem with people going to their holy site, but I don't think that's a good reason to steal their city. Sorry.
I mean that's fair, but you have to see that even like it's obviously not just a problem with the Jewish control of the city, right? That's not why the violence itself is happening, because even when the Jews weren't in control of the city back in 1964, there was still mass violence and there was still discrimination and riots against the Jewish people. Onto that point, but even
what violence?
It was mass riots. Is the evidence I found? I think I have a specific.
Okay, so you're talking about violence after this happened.
Well, in 1964 specifically. So it was before 1967 when the Jewish people recaptured the city. It was while it was under Arab control.
I don't see how that's relevant to 2018.
Well, it's somewhat relevant, right? Because if we're going to say that Jerusalem and the Jewish people are responsible for this violence and therefore moving the embassy to Jerusalem enhances this violence, it's fair to look at that even when the Arabs were in control of the city, there was still mass violence.
I never said anyone was responsible for the violence. You did.
Okay, well, I was just bringing that point out because there's an argument that I've heard people make against it. But now I want to get onto like the historical claims of Jerusalem in like the Palestinians versus the Jewish people, right? So in the Jewish Bible, the word Jerusalem is said hundreds of times. In the Quran, it's not mentioned by name once. It's referred to as the Holy Land, if they're even referring to that area. And so like the only reason we recognize Jerusalem for what it is mainly because of its significance to the Jewish people. Like we probably would not know the name Jerusalem unless it was, brought to what it is by the Jewish people through their religious sites. And especially when you have, even in the Christian Bible, recognizing it in the Old Testament as given to the Jews by God. I don't see how there's the same claim. You can put that when you compare it to the Quran, not mentioning it by name once specifically.
That's the genetic fallacy. I'm not here to talk about the Quran. Okay. I'm here to talk about 2018. I'm not here to talk about what's in some book that someone wrote. Well, archaeologists and theologians can't even agree where these sites were.
But it's what people perceive them as, right? Like it's the same thing as the Wailing Wall. Like it's about what's in the mind of people, right? Like that's kind of the whole thing with religion. It's about what you believe specifically, right? So if you believe that this is where the religious site is and this is the religious site is, and you have a discrepancy there, that's perfectly fair within your beliefs, but it's about what you believe in that site, not what it actually is. They're not worshiping, a wall for no random reason because they really like walls. It's not because they're a bunch of Donald Trump fans. It's because they believe in the religious symbolic issues and tied to that wall and how it has a religious site. But as far as like a claim to the city, historically, I think that personally that the Jewish people have a larger historic claim to the city of Jerusalem than that of the Palestinians and of the Arabs. But once again, the topic is about if Trump should have moved the U.S. embassy, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about a lot. It's like how the criticism he got for that. And so once again, I think it's his job to pass laws, put through by Congress, and I don't think it's fair to criticize him for.
Can I answer that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
The problem is that the thing is he should have delayed it for 6 months. Like he did delay it for 6 months. And they said it's going to take years to do this because it's a security threat. So that's why he shouldn't do it now. If he did it as part of a peace plan, if there had been a peace plan enacted, then there wouldn't be a problem.
Okay, so he should have just delayed it. I mean, other presidents delayed it indefinitely, right? But you talk about a peace plan.
Chandler, what happened after the Oslo Accords fell through? When did they fall through?
I'd assume late mid 2000s.
No, it was 99 2000.
99 2000.
Then what happened?
Like I said, I'm not a historian. I can only answer like the questions about today. I've done some fair research.
They said they were going to move the embassy to Jerusalem as before the peace talk, and then that Eastern Jerusalem, Al Quds, was part of Israel, and it's completely surrounded by settlements, and the peace deal, the Palestinian capital is in Ramallah, which is a suburb outside of those settlements. And then Oslo Accords fell through. Then 9/11 happened. And why did the hijackers, what was their lead reason?
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons, but I guess the main one would be the U.S. ties to Israel, right?
Yes, and it was because it was this thing over the Capitol and this holy site.
Okay. So the threat of terrorism is what should deter us from moving our embassy to Jerusalem, or what's the point?
Well, that's why every president has postponed it for 6 months, and Trump postponed it for 6 months, and then he says it's going to take years now. His own cabinet said it was a bad decision behind closed doors because this is a security threat. It's religious extremism and divide and conquer at its worst.
Okay, so on to the thing about terrorism. So to start, the peace 1995, right? We waited 22 years for there to be peace talks, and there's been attempts at peace talks in 22 years. Both in 2000, the prime minister, the Jewish prime minister offered Yasser Arafat, probably butchering that name. He offered him the Dome of the Rock in East Jerusalem, as long as the Jewish people were allowed access to the Dome of the Rock. And he turned the offer down without even offering a counter offer or even trying to negotiate. Once again, this happened in 2008 with Maha Abbas. He offered him international control of East Jerusalem, and he also offered him all the holy sites in East Jerusalem. On top of that, he offered him Israeli land to make up for the Israeli settlements. And he once again turned it down without a counteroffer. So this has been a long time coming with the peace negotiations that have been happening. And I'm not saying either side's perfect, but there comes a point where, it's been 22 years. It's time to actually, come through with our word and come through with what the American people and our legislative body, voted for and, put into law.
Well, the Palestinians aren't even interested in talking with the United States anymore. Abbas has only talked to China or Russia now, and the reason is that the U.S. is not an honest broker, and that just also goes back to the 4th Geneva Convention, because all of these talks that you're talking about, none of them account for refugees. The biggest problem with the Palestinian issue and these peace deals is not what's going on in the Palestinian territories or Israel itself. It's not the apartheid issue. It's the refugee issue specifically, which is part of that issue. But specifically, none of these deals include refugees that you're talking about. So there's which they have to account for under the 4th Geneva Convention. So there's really isn't there, and this goes, and going back to how this relates to moving the embassy is that it relates to the funding for these refugees, which they're losing their money. It's 3rd generation. They literally live on a level above it. They just built another level. It's all concrete, and the United States has to pay for all this. It's a big problem, Chandler.
Okay, so I agree it's a problem, but I clearly see, in 2008 when they're offered land to make up for the settlements that the Israeli peoples took, that clearly compensates for refugees for some part, right? Because it's giving them more land for them to occupy and build housing and whatnot, and to possibly develop.
By 2008, Chandler, Israel already controls over 90% of the land in 2008. There really isn't anything to broker for at all. The only thing the Palestinians are doing is saying, okay, fine, just take it.
Well,
just take it. I mean, that's literally just take it, and then you can go to the holy site now. Come on.
Well, no. In 2008, the Israel Prime Minister offers Maha Abbas international control of East Jerusalem as all the holy sites as well as land to compensate for some of the land that Israel stole. That is like free land, literally. It's they're trying to come to peace, and he turns it down without
All
a
the land.
counteroffer.
You
Not
realize?
all the land, not all the
Are you
land,
talking about 48
not all the land.
borders?
I don't know the
When,
specific
wait, wait,
amount. It
wait.
was a 2008 Israeli. I can.
So they're going to leave the West Bank because they already left
They
Gaza.
were going to give
They
them the
already left
Gaza Strip.
Gaza.
They were going to give them another section that
They gave them the
connects. They were going
Gaza
to connect the West Bank to the Gaza Strip. Was the specific section? I know that. I'm not sure how large the amount of land was, but I know there was a offer of land, and he turned it down without a counteroffer.
Because of the refugee thing, like I just said. It doesn't account for the refugees, and that's the problem with all these peace talks. And it doesn't account for the resources. It probably didn't account for the resources there either. I don't know too much about that one, but I do know in general that none of them account for refugees. And because the Oslo one didn't account for the resources there, I really doubt this one did as well.
Well, but even if that's true, aren't you doing a disservice to your people if you cannot gain them like more land to develop, live on, possibly have like agricultural reasons, especially when it's connecting to the Gaza Strip, right? Like if this issue, like, because it's not like the Israeli people are asking for much in return, right? They're asking for peace. Peace is honestly like not that hard of a thing. To stop engaging violence on another group of people, like it's not that hard especially when they're offering you like a fairly relatable a fairly decent proposal. Or even if you say, oh, it doesn't account for refugees, then come up with a counter offer, then come to the table and try and talk about it. That's not being done by Palestinian leaders. Saudi Arabia just recently, when this actually whole thing happened, it was reported that Saudi Arabian leaders spoke with Palestinian leaders and told them to come to the table with Israel, and they refused to do it. And the media had all this coverage about, we're upsetting Saudi Arabia because there's strong ties with the Palestinians, but it comes down to
Saudi Arabia doesn't have strong ties to the Palestinians.
Well, they talked to them about coming to the table for peace negotiations.
Saudi Arabia is our ally.
Well, now they're a part of the anti-Iran. Now they're a part of the anti-Iran, with the anti-Iran alliance, what they call it, between Jordan, Egypt.
My enemies are enemies.
Yeah, but like what it comes down to, I don't see the same level of negotiation and like the goal to attain peace from the Palestinian people, and therefore I don't think it's safe to say that simply the threat of terrorism should stop the United States and President Trump from enforcing a law that happened 22 years ago and was once again voted unanimously in a resolution just prior in 2017.
Well, what I said is that every president has delayed this for 6 months because of the threat of terrorism, and it is one of the reasons that 9/11 happened. So I think that there's good reason to be concerned. And also, I mean, what if the Arab League, what if these states didn't trade with us? So I think there's an economic reason to be concerned as well.
I mean, like as far as economics go, like I'm an economics major, and trading with some of these Arab regions, like besides oil, which we have friends in Saudi Arabia, like it obviously, like we said, didn't make every Arab country angry, right? Only a select few. And
Saudi Arabia is the Arab League.
Well, yeah, but
Chandler, Saudi Arabia wants a two-state solution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The thing is, like, when what you're talking about is you're assuming that there's going to be a two-state solution, and there just isn't going to be one, especially because Israel has conquered over 90% of this land before they're even going to these peace talks, and they're not talking about the refugees. They're not allowing the refugees to come back. We know what their goal is. They actually have a goal where they have to get the Arab population down, and this is in Jerusalem. This is really, it's in all the land, because this is what's true in the Green Line, the proper borders of Israel, that they'll annex it when it's a Jewish state. So they actually want to have a 24%. It has to be 24% Arab, 76% Jewish, and this goes for Jerusalem and East Jerusalem before they'll just annex it. And that's what the plan is. So really, the plan is they want all the land, and they already have more than 90%. And in 2008, they already have more than 90%, and they control all the resources. So they're not accounting for this to begin. So there really isn't anything to go to the table and talk about. It's like you're just saying take it, like just leave me alone. Like, but the thing is that they control all the resources. The refugees are not accounted for the way they should be under the Fourth Geneva Convention, and which it would be Israel's responsibility, not the United Nations or the U.S.'s responsibility to give money to support the Palestinians who are in these refugee camps. They would have to account for that because it's their fault, and that's not part of these peace plans.
Okay.
So there's nothing to go to the table and talk about. It's just and every time before they do the negotiation, what do? They build more settlements in the West Bank. So there really isn't anything, and they're all around East Jerusalem. So there just isn't anything for them to go to the table and talk about.
I mean, you can always go to the table and negotiate, right? Like obviously, like in 2008, like I talked about earlier, the Israeli prime minister went there, land, East Jerusalem, all the holy sites you want. You set the terms for peace, right? They wanted the peace, and they're even offering to give them back some land that connects to the Gaza Strip, right? I'm not sure how much land it was, but it was something. Apparently something worthy to go to the table to. That was a fairly fair offer. And so
you're not telling me what land that is. You're just assuming that there is this great deal. I already told you refugees. I already told you resources. You're not telling me what this looks like because like I told you, they already conquered 90% of the land. I've already said this.
Okay, yeah. They conquered 90% of the land. Then why is the Palestinian leaders, like, if they're so concerned about the refugees, right? Why don't they go to the table with Israel and say, you guys want peace? Then let's make a deal that accounts for refugees and accounts for the land that you took, because Israel's come to the table, right? And they're the ones proposing offers. It's the Palestinian leadership that's turning it down without even proposing a counter offer or even talking about it, right? So in my perspective, one side is actually trying to come to terms and negotiations and at least propose peace, compared to the other opposition that does not even want to discuss the matter.
If I called you and offered you $1 to mow my lawn, would you call me back?
Do you really think it's to that extent, though? Like, I mean, come on. Like,
yeah, because we don't have the same access to resources. The land's already conquered.
But it's like, but we're not asking for mow the lawn. We're not necessarily asking for like a service. They're asking for peace, right? If you called me and said, "I'll give you $1, stop throwing rocks at my window," I might call back and say, "Yeah, give me $5." It's different than like a service or asking them to perform some task, right? And once again, you talked about the terrorism and every president delaying this. I mean, like I said earlier, there comes a point where how long can you wait before you just have to put your foot in the ground and do it, right? Because we have, especially like in the United States, there's the fear of terrorism, right? Like in the Western world, everybody's afraid of terrorism, maybe unjustly so, who knows? But you cannot let that dictate what the president's going to do. If the president's allowed to pick and choose which bills from Congress he wants to implement, especially once they're 22 years old, because of the fear of terrorism, where do we draw the line? What precedent does that create for the future?
I think we should follow the Port Geneva Convention, and we should follow international law. We should do what the Security Council says because we fund that. But let me ask you this question: have there been peace talks since 2008?
I mean, I'm maybe not one of note. I'm not exactly sure. I did some quick research in the past hour, but I'm sure there's been some sort of proposal for peace by one of the two sides in the past 10 years. I can say that with
the last peace talk was 2015.
Yeah. I mean, there something happened, right? It's been 10 years. They didn't just block each
December
other.
of 2015. It was about a year ago.
Yeah, they didn't just block each other on Facebook. They still chat. But
okay.
Yeah. But I mean, it comes down to, first of all, you talk about us funding the UN Security Council. Well, first of all, not as much anymore, right? We cut their budget, but second of all, it comes down to the issue of sovereignty. Right? That's the whole issue with the UN itself, is countries having to give up part of their sovereignty. And I'm a big believer that every country has the right through sovereignty to allow to put their embassy wherever they want their embassy to be in that person. Because when the embassy, the representation of your country's power in that foreign place, if they can decide, and clearly they did through a law in 1995 and once again in 2017, that it's going to be more effective to recognize the city of Jerusalem and to move their embassy there, I don't see that as a major problem that is the fault of Donald Trump, especially.
I didn't say it was his fault. I just said it had to be part of a peace deal, which it was supposed to be, and that that wasn't fulfilled. So when they make a peace deal, they can move their embassy. We can move the embassy there when that happens. But until then, no, it's a bad idea. Like I said, for security reasons and for economic reasons.
So you just want to you would just want to see this as part of a peace deal, then, between the Palestinians and the Jerusalem, the U.S. being allowed to move their embassy into the city.
That's the best case scenario, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I can definitely see that as like the best outcome, but and the unlikelihood that that's going to happen, right? Like, it's been 22 years we've been waiting since this bill was passed. Like, conflict in Jerusalem has been literally happening forever, even before it was Israel and controlled by the Jews. Even when it was under British occupation, there was still conflict, and so I don't think we can just wait eternally for them to suddenly want to come to the table and stop fighting, especially when we can both agree both sides do not want to give up their horse in the race, right?
Chandler, I really believe it can happen, but we just have to. This has to be an honest conversation, and when that happens, I think we're going to see some great things here.
I mean, I hope it happens, but I mean, there's a lot of people with a lot of power that have their head up their own asses, to be honest. All around the world. But so, like, it comes to the point for me, at least, that especially that when it comes to the role of the president in our representative democracy, that they have to be held to the standard of enforcing the laws passed by Congress, no matter how much people or other countries agree or disagree with them, right? Because that is his job, give or take. And so I think
I answered that, Chandler. I told you that it's binding. We're bound to the Fourth Geneva Convention because of the Holocaust, and that's the whole foundation for the United Nations, and that we have to uphold that first. We can't. I mean, if you read the language to the Jerusalem Embassy Act, it talks around that. The way that it refers, it assumed, and the language assumes that this is part of a peace deal. The clause isn't coming exactly to mind, but yes, it assumes that it's part of a peace deal, and that just hasn't happened.
Okay, so I mean, I can definitely get behind you that a peace deal would be the best outcome, but what first I'll ask, what specifically do you think it violates as far as the Fourth Geneva Convention, as far as moving the embassy there?
I believe the clause is 47.6. I can read it to you.
Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely, I'm very interested.
So, it's actually 49.6.
Okay.
Article 49.6 of the Fourth Geneva Convention states, the occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. And that's Article 49.6, Fourth Geneva Convention.
Okay. And so you think it's violation to move your embassy to Jerusalem?
Yes, in fact, in 1980, when they annexed Western Jerusalem, they took part of Eastern Jerusalem, and that's actually where their Capitol buildings are.
Okay, well, that's fair, but I mean, first of all, the United States isn't the only country that's currently undergoing war. Right? I believe it was Nicaragua or some other countries also moving its embassy to Jerusalem. I forget the specific nation, but
where do the rebels in Nicaragua get their weapons?
Okay, that's fair enough. But it is relevant that at least some other parts of the world, still understands that, and kind of follows the U.S.'s back on this, even though they were condemned by the UN. But we won't get into my thoughts on the UN. but it comes down to, I don't think there's an inherent problem with basically what this comes down to, and the issue that I interpret is people are having a problem with the president of the United States doing his job. And sure, it may violate the Fourth Geneva Convention, possibly. I mean, I haven't done my research on how this relates to the Fourth Geneva Convention. I definitely will look into it, but I don't see a foreign power moving its representation in a certain part of the world to what it declares as the capital, what it recognizes as the capital of a certain group of people, a problem that's going to cause all these issues, like violence. It's that's already existed. Terrorism, that still already exists, all across the world. So and that even predates Israel or Jewish control, back even to the British, like I said earlier. So I don't see how moving it directly to Jerusalem causes all these problems that we've seen existing for over 100 years. I can see how it may not help peace to some extent in Jerusalem, but we've been waiting 22 years since this bill was passed, and at what point do we draw the line in the sand, right, and just basically do it anyway, uphold our obligation to the American people?
Look, even Iran would recognize Israel if it wasn't for this Jerusalem thing. It's just a bad idea, and like I keep saying, I don't have a problem with this as part of a peace process. I don't know if you saw the last debate I did on this.
I did.
We actually pretty much agreed. We just said that, hopefully this will become part of a peace deal, and that would be a good thing.
Yeah,
but the thing is, maybe there's a silver lining, but what's going on the ground there is that they're annexing more since this decision. They've decided to annex more of East Jerusalem, unfortunately, and they've actually made it harder for East Jerusalem to be part of a Palestinian state. If Saudi Arabia wants there to be a two-state solution, which and Saudi Arabia wants a two-state solution where the Palestinians would take East Jerusalem or not. I've given up on the two-state solution thing. I think the best thing would be just to say that do what happened here in make it like the United States or Australia or wherever, and just call it for what it is and take it from there.
Yeah, I mean,
as a whole.
And I can definitely agree that part of like a peace solution would be the best outcome for this issue. But I do think that while that's obviously the best outcome, like I said, but there comes a point where the president, and it happens to be Donald Trump, has to uphold his obligation to the American people to enforce the laws that are passed by his legislative body, regardless of, what else happens in the world per se. I mean, it was, passed in 1995. I think we can at least agree in some aspect that is an obligation the president has to the people, right?
Like I said, though, what you're not answering is that the obligation for the embassy to be moved was not fulfilled because it's supposed to be part of a peace plan, and it actually hindered that peace plan. And the thing is that every president has postponed it for 6 months, and Donald Trump even did this, and he thinks that it will take several years for it to be implemented because of security problems. And the president should make decisions that put the American people first and our security first.
Well, yeah, I mean, but like, just because it's going to cause some security problems, like, even like, I mean, I doubt we're going to see another 9/11 from this, right? Because of how much our like international security has increased, right? Especially like a domestic attack in America. But when it comes down to putting the American people first, I would argue that, the threat of having a president that does not enforce the laws or is able to pick and choose which laws they're going to enforce trumps that, no pun intended, of a possible terrorist attack in the United States of 9/11 caliber or less, in my opinion. And that by implementing this law that was passed in 1995 significantly, and once again in 2017 was unanimously voted on by the Senate, is therefore putting the American people and their interests first before any obligations they have to any foreign power.
How is it putting the American people first?
Because when like, we're a representative democracy, right? And so when you elect an official or a certain area elects an official, and that official votes on a bill or becomes a law or a resolution like we saw in 2017, when you put that through, even though you may not agree with it or you may see some possible issues that arise from it, that is putting the American people first. Do you think Trump signed this bill and decided that he is going to move the embassy to Jerusalem thinking that it was going to increase his approval ratings or that it was going to make him more popular? Of course not, right? He knows he's going to get criticized. He's going to be attacked for it, right?
No, I think that's why he did it, was to make himself popular, especially with evangelical Christians. And and because what his reputation is, it obviously helps him with the Jewish vote as well.
I mean, but you have to understand that, he knows he's going to get opposition for this, right? And that clearly wasn't the case.
People are going to oppose this. People are going to vote for him anyway. It's Donald Trump.
I mean, that's I get what you're saying, but still, it's an obligation to the American people to uphold basically your position and to enforce the laws that are passed by your legislative body. And so I believe that doing that, regardless of pressure from foreign powers or the possible threats of terrorism, is more looking out for the American people, putting their interests first, than just delaying it for 6 months until eventually there's possibly a peace talk.
Could he uphold the law and delay it for 6 months like he did?
I mean, it's I mean, like, why do they delay it for 6 months, right? It's because they hope that in the future there's going to be a peace deal and they can somehow incorporate this, right, or something along those lines. They're waiting for things to simmer down a bit, right? But eventually,
wouldn't it make more sense to do that first?
But when would you draw the line, right? Because it's not like this is the first. Like, since this bill was passed, there's been several occasions. You said the most recent was in 2015, where they're coming to term for a peace deal. 2008, there was the one I brought up. 2000, the Camp David, right? And it's just not happening. So where do you draw that line, Julian? If you get elected tomorrow, where do you draw the line for when you tackle this issue?
When you're ready to talk about refugees and when you're ready to evenly disperse the resources there, because there's too many people there and there aren't enough resources. There's not enough water to drink.
Okay. All right. So, but what if that doesn't happen, right? Because that hasn't been happening for 22 years, right? I mean, that's why they didn't do this on day one after they, passed Congress passed this, right? That's why they decided to delay it so long, is to hope that things would get better and that we could start to work out these issues. And it's just not happening right now. And so
they're not productive. There's never been a productive conversation.
Well, exactly.
It's always been.
I'm agreeing with that. I'm agreeing with you on that there hasn't been a productive conversation. There's been attempts made.
But that's not the Palestinians' fault. I think for your point to be valid, it would have to be the Palestinians' fault alone, and it's not.
Well, to some extent, right? When you're getting offered something for peace, people just want peace, and you were declining it and not even trying to negotiate, not giving a counteroffer. And this isn't like Fox News telling me
they don't just want peace. I mean, I want peace, but the Palestinians are divided on if they want peace or not. And I don't agree with it, because that's not what this is about. But I think if someone took Ohio, I would probably be pretty upset about that myself. So I just understand where they're coming from. But I mean, I want peace. But but just to say, I mean, what you're saying isn't true, that they all want peace. They don't all want peace.
Not everybody wants peace, but
they might not want. I mean, I don't have a problem with Jewish people being there. They're already there. That's not what this is about. The people who live there are already there, and so forth and so on. But they might not see it that way.
But yeah, I mean, I agree. But in the roles of the population, we have to talk about their leaders and their elected officials, right? So when you have the Prime Minister of Israel saying, "I want peace. Here, have some land, and you can have all the holy sites in East Germany on your terms." That's that's kind of what matters, to some extent, more than how the individual Jewish population feels, right? It's like when Abe Lincoln freed the slaves, it was kind of irrelevant what the Southern people thought about it, because he was the representative figurehead of the country after the whole ordeal was settled. And so, like you talked about, I was just wanting to your point that it was mainly the Palestinians' fault that there haven't been peace negotiations. They should come to the table and negotiate, unlike what they've been doing in the past, where they don't even try and come up with a counter offer. They just say no. And this isn't Fox News telling me this, just say no. This was Bill Clinton. Even Bill Clinton is saying that they didn't even propose a counter offer in 2000. So I think it is valid to say that the Palestinians are contributing much more to the silence and the lack of progression on this issue than the Israeli people or the Israeli leadership.
Chandler, who was the last president? Who was the last president to say that the colonies in the West Bank were illegal and needed to stop?
I mean, I don't know.
Herbert Walker Bush.
Okay. H.W. Bush.
So I think Bill Clinton, especially since he enacted this act before he went to the table for the peace talks, I think that he's very pro-Israel, and so is Hillary Clinton. She said that when the Palestinians, when they finally had a recognized state at the UN in 2012, that it was that was a bad idea and that it was harm the peace process.
I mean, yeah, no, I think Hillary Clinton's a treacherous snake, but you have to have some credibility, right? When you're the president and you're basically reporting on the events that happen at a summit between nations, there's some credibility that comes with that, right? Saying what happened exactly, even if you have a bias, something along those lines happened. If they had this nice conversation over the course of days about what we're going to do about refugees and peace, I doubt Bill Clinton could get away with saying they didn't even propose a counteroffer, right? There's some level of realism to that. I think we have to agree on that.
Oslo was as close as to a peace deal that we've ever been. And I mean, I think for your point to be valid, you have to assume that there's going to be a two-state solution. You have to assume that it's the Palestinians' fault alone. And how can it be the Palestinians' fault alone when Jerusalem is supposed to be an international city, and one half of it is conquered in 1947, and then somehow it's the Palestinians' fault that they lose their half of it, the eastern half, in in 1967, and then since then they build entirely around it and into the West Bank, which they're not supposed to do, and then they annex the other half of it and build their Capitol buildings there on land that was supposed to be part of East Jerusalem, and continue to do this every time before there's a peace talk. So I don't think it's the Palestinian. I think for your point to be valid, it would have to be the Palestinians' fault alone, and because of this Jerusalem thing, it's really hard for there to be a peace talk, and it's not just that would be the Palestinians' fault or for there to be a successful peace talk, especially because it doesn't include refugees.
And I can understand that them not being happy with the peace talks that are currently undergoing, but then come to the table, talk about refugees, say these are the issues that are important to us, and that this is what we'll do for peace that you want, and you can come to the table and have a civilized discussion rather than just not even proposing counter arguments.
If your goal is to have a 76 ethnic majority in your state, and your state is 50-50 between two ethnicities, that's really hard to do, Chandler.
I agree. Thank you, Julian. It was a great discussion.
Thanks, Chandler.
Peace.
Have a good night.
You too.